Hey, how's it going, guys? I hope you're having a great day. Last time I was speaking and making some videos and filming with some friends, and I could notice that sometimes and most of the time when we are start filming and making videos, we are not sure what the frame rates we need to use, as we have different options like 24, 25, 30, 60, 120 and so on frames per second to use. So this will be depend of the situation and the scenes we are going to record. For example, interviews, action scenes, B-rolls and any other kind of footage. Today I'm going to explain you what you need to know for frame rates and what frame rate is. I will tell you a little bit my experience so you can understand a little bit better and know when you have to use the right frame rate. If this is your first time here in the channel, I'm Jose Daniel and welcome. I make tutorials every Tuesday and another content every Thursday. So don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to get notified and then you don't miss the incoming videos. Sometimes we need to change the frame rates depending on the situation. If we want to record an interview, if we want to record an action scene, B-roll, slow motion, we need to get that motion blur. So that is the situation when we need to change the frame rates depending on what we want to film. But first we need to know what frame rate is, and we can find the expression for frame rate as FPS or frames per second, and this is the frequency that which consecutive image appears into the displays. So in other words, the frame rates, let's say the video is coming from a sequence of image, right? So one frame is one image. When you place a consecutive image, you are going to start seeing motion. So for example, if we have a video for 24 frames per second, and then it's going to be 24 consecutive image. If we have 30 frames per second, it's going to be 30 consecutive image, and so on. Knowing what frame rate is, we need to know how we perceive motion. The human eyes perceive between 10 to 12 images per second. So in other words, if we see those kind of image, we are going to see them individually. But when we start seeing more than 12 images per second, we are going to start seeing motion. I bet you when you were in the school, you drew some lines, some comics in your notebook, and then you start turning those pages and you notice the motion over there, right? It's the same as the cine when they start. They were using a projector and they changed the frequency of the image, just changing the voltage. So if you want to know more about the history of the motion and how they started photography, check the link in the description below and let them know that I sent you to that video. Now let's check the frame rates. You can find in your camera the options for NTSC and the PAL. These are the regulations for the television and it will depend on the region. So for example, the PAL is for South America, Africa, Asia and Oceania, and the NTSC are for the other regions. So you can see here the frame rates for those ones. The PAL and the NTSC are different frame rates. So at the moment I'm using NTSC. So in my camera right now I'm using 23.976 frames per second. When I edit my videos I use the same frame rate, so 23.976 frames per second. Depending of the footage I'm using, like if I'm using a higher frame rate like 30, 60 or 120 depending, I will convert those footage into my original sequence that is going to be 23.976 frames per second. To find those options you can go to the menu, video system, and then you will find the NTSC and the PAL. Choose what suits better for you. For me, is working the NTSC as I use 23.976 frames per second. Sometimes I use the 29.9 frames per second and the 59 frames per second. But when we need to use 24 frames per second? Well, this is the standard for a film. So this gives us the natural motion blur that we see every day. For example, right now if I'm moving my hand, you can see how blurred it is. But if you increase the frame per second, you have to increase the shutter speed as well, and then you will see less motion blur. So for 24 frames per second, I recommend for interviews, action scenes like I'm doing right now, just speaking. You don't have to see more details or anything else. And this gives us the natural audio as well that we can use in our footage. But if you want to lower the speed and you have another scene, for example if someone is walking, you want to keep this natural motion blur, but you want to slow down a little bit the pace. So this case we are going to use 30 frames per second, and this will decrease 20% of our speed. It will keep the motion blur and it will slow down a little bit and it will look really natural. So for more details in the shots, when something is happening really fast and you want to keep some details on it, for example water, smoke, dust or explosion or any other situation that is the motion is really fast, and then is when we are going to use 60 frames per second or 120 frames per second. We want to have more details in our shot. So in this case we can decrease the speed as 50 or 70% of the original footage. But when we use this kind of frame rates, the audio is not really
good for this kind of video.
So we have to design the new audio, because when we decrease the speed, it will decrease the speed of the audio as well, and then it's going to sound weird. So then you need to use some design for these clips. You have to catch the steps, you have to catch the ambience, the sounds of the ambience and everything else for that video and that specific moment to keep realistic, right? In this kind of frames per race, we normally use a different angle as well that we don't see every day. We always see and that's high, right? But when you use B-rolls, you go lower, you go in different position, you use speed ramps, you use a different transitions, and then it's going to look really well. My recommendation for you is not to overuse the high frame rates. Use it when you really need it, when you really want to have that specific moment, more details, more dreamy moments, and when you have an action like someone is fighting, then you need to use 24 frames per second, or for example an interview as well. So we are not going to use 180 frames per second or higher frame rates, because these frame rates are for other purpose. We are not normally used in our films because this is not going to look really natural. Using 60 and 120 frames per second, it will slow down the moment, but it will keep the natural scene. But when we use 180 and higher frame rates per second, this is going to look really slow and is going to look really different. You can have a look on YouTube, look for slow motion high frame rates, and you will understand what I'm talking about. The other thing you have to remember is to use the 180-degree shutter rule, and what I mean with this is whichever you use in the frame rates, let's say 24, 30, 60, whichever your frame rate is, you have to double the shutter speed. So for example, if you're using 24 frames per second, your shutter speed have to be the double. So in this means it have to be 148, but in our cameras we don't find that, so in that case it's going to be 1/50. If we using 30 frames per second, your shutter speed have to be 160, and if you're using 60 frames per second, your shutter speed have to be 120, and so on. Now if we see this clip side by side, you can notice in the hand how the motion blur is affected depending of the shutter speed. If we need to do a recap, remember not to overuse the high frame rates, and this will affect our audio for our videos. Use it for specific moments and when you really need it. The other thing to remember is the shutter speed have to be the double of the frame rates. So that's it for today, guys. I hope you would like this video and learn something new today. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the upcoming videos. I will make a video for slow motion in post-production, how to convert the 60 frames per second to 24 frames per second, and you will have that natural slow motion, and you don't want to see the flicker motion when you use 24 and then slow down the speed. It's going to do some flicker, so it's not going to look natural. So stay tuned, I'm going to show you that one. Let me know in the comment if you want to learn more about the frame rates and other techniques. Hit the like button and see you guys in the next video.
Peace.